for the Governance Institute 2020-2021, we also are going to achieve a similar level of
that's all. So, but if I want to talk, what do I do?
Of success.
I will mute myself.
Colleagues, can I ask everyone to mute your
name? So I have to mute myself. So if I want to talk, I will do what? So this one.
Colleagues, can I ask everyone to mute your mic, please? Except, of course, the interpreters. Thank you very much. Basiru, can you mute all the mics, please? So for purposes of organizing ourselves, I guess we need to make the point that at all times, it's fair for everyone for you to mute your mic so that we are able to have a clear recording, but also for everyone to understand what we're doing. It's become a tradition at Codesria for us for the executive secretary to be asked to preside over the opening session of the institutes. And so really I'm doing a task that has been imposed on me by the training grants and fellowship program. And I see there is a generous allocation of time. So we are going to have to do a number of things. The first one of which, of course, is to introduce a number of colleagues who are going to play a central and critical role for you in this institute. Rather than introduce them myself, I'm going to give each one of them a minute or so to introduce themselves. We will start with the director of the institute, followed by the resource persons of the institute, and I will do a quick introduction of the senior staff of Codesria who are present and make a deliberate acknowledgement of all my colleagues in the secretariat who I will be able to spot on the line. So can I take this rare privilege to ask Professor Benkikosi Moyo to introduce himself.
Thank you very much, Godwin. Thank you very much, colleagues at Codesria. I hope you can hear me very well.
We can hear you very well.
Thank you, and good morning and good afternoon. I hope those are the only zones we have, but if there's anyone in the evening zone, good evening. You can never tell with these virtual meetings. So my name is Benkikosi Moyo. I am at the Wits Business School in Johannesburg. I established a center on African philanthropy and social investment after my many years of working with civil societies across the continent and developing a narrative.
Sorry, Becky, I think there is one mic on, and it's totally making it impossible for us to hear you. I don't know, Basiru, if you can spot the mic.
It's Godwin, sorry, it's a distant bear. It's Justin Bear. He has to mute his mic. Everything I muted, he activated again. Please mute your mic, Justin.
Who is this? This is Justin?
Yes.
Okay, now I can see that his mic is muted. You can continue.
Okay, thank you. I was about to say I set up this center at the Wits Business School after many years of writing on civil society and philanthropy. And I wanted to provide an opportunity and platform for discourse on the interface between philanthropy, civil society, and business, and how those are either governed, managed, and the roles that they play in the development discourse of the continent. So I'm looking forward to the next 2 weeks discussing the various forms of civil society and its expressions, and how that can be contextualized within the African context, especially when we're talking about governance and the very notions of shrinking or shifting spaces. Thank you very much, Godwin.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. Can I ask Dr. Eric Gang to introduce himself?
Thank you, Godwin. Good morning, colleagues at Codesria. It's a privilege to join as a resource person for this Governance Institute. My name is Eric Ngang, and I am a social justice activist. And after long years of work in the civil society in Cameroon, where my interest was on promote indigenous and local governance practices among civil society organizations, where I rose to become the vice president of the Plateforme Nationale de la Société Civile Cameroon, I had to take a step back and go back to the university where I'm currently doing a PhD, have completed a PhD on climate justice issues, looking at the contribution of civil society in the whole process of lawmaking. So I am keen, looking with interest to engage with the laureates on looking at those indigenous processes that places civil society as a source and that challenges the notions when they try to access resources and they self-sabotage themselves, and looking at those alternative areas where they can reposition themselves as a resource as opposed to seeking resources and sabotaging themselves. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, and good to see you after many, many years. Can I ask Professor Moshin El-Ahmadi to introduce himself?
Oui, bonjour à tous, bonjour à toutes. Est-ce que vous m'entendez? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Alors, je suis Dr Moshin El-Ahmadi. Je suis professeur de sciences politiques et relations internationales à l'Université Kadir de Marrakech. Et aussi, j'étais directeur de l'école de gouvernance à Venise. Et du coup, je connais la réalité un peu du point de vue sociologique et du point de vue sociopolitique de la société civile et des organisations non gouvernementales. Alors, je suis très content d'être parmi vous et je suis d'autant plus content de faire connaissance avec mes collègues africains et aussi de débattre et de discuter de questions qui nous intéressent tous, à savoir le développement de nos sociétés respectives, mais aussi le développement des sciences sociales et la manière, le regard que nous portons, nous, comme chercheurs, comme universitaires, sur nos sociétés et les manières pour les développer et discuter ensemble de la crise des sociétés civiles, mais aussi du développement de la démocratie en Afrique. Voilà ce que j'ai à dire pour l'instant. Merci.
Thank you very much, Prof, for the self-introduction. Do I have Professor Awino Okech online? Do I have Awino? Okay, can I ask Professor Adebayo Lukoshi if he's online? I think I saw him online.
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, the Secretariat, Godwin, and good morning, Director of the Institute, Becky. And good morning to all of the laureates. A bit of a homecoming for me virtually. I used to sit in Dakar in the Secretariat of Codesria, but that sounds like many moons ago. And currently I am in Addis Ababa, but very much on my way to Johannesburg in the near future to join the Wits University School of Governance as a professor and leading a center on democracy and development. And I very much look forward to sharing this platform with you. A small bit of history. I actually had the good fortune, again, many moons ago, of being the pioneer director of the Codesria Governance Institute series when it was launched for the first time in 1992. And yeah, okay, looking forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Adebayo Olukoshi. We prefer to call him Bayo, just like we prefer to call Becky Kozimoyo Becky. So if you hear me say that, it's not out of disrespect. And now that you've revealed that you are the pioneer director, the section about which I was going to speak on the history of the Institute, I think I'll just hand it over to you so that you can speak. I believe the reason why we can't see your image, Bio, is because you are in Addis and the bandwidth is not that strong. So we will hang in with you for the time that you are speaking. I think that brings me to the end of the set of colleagues who are going to be working with you over the next couple of days and a maximum of 2 weeks on the Governance Institute. And before I go on to the introduction of the other colleagues from the Secretariat of Codesria, I want to extend my word of thanks to the director of the Institute, to the resource persons for taking time out of what I know is normally a very busy schedule to join us for the Governance Institute 2020-2021. And we don't take this for granted. This is the only way by which we can help in nurturing the next generation of African academics. So really thank you very much. I'm not even sure that words can express the level of gratitude we have for having you all. So can I request Ibrahim Oanda Ogachi to introduce himself?
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ibrahim Oanda. I work for
Oanda, we need to see you. Thank you.
Is that okay? Yes. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I know that I've met some of you there already in past institutes that we have convened. My name is Ibrahim Oanda. I'm the one who heads the training and the governance, the training and the fellowships institute of the council. And I and the colleagues in the program have been engaging with you since you applied for this institute. And we look forward to continue engaging you until, as is expected, we get to publish your work out of the engagements that you will have during these 2 weeks. Thanks, and looking forward to the kind of discussions that are going to take place during the institute.
Colleagues, you will have noticed that over the period of maybe a month or so, you've been interacting with the training, grants and fellowship program. And as he said, Oanda is in charge of that program. Ato?
Good morning, everyone. Like Oanda, I would like to welcome you to this institute. It is good to see that you have a very nice combination of people who have called the council their intellectual home for a long time, as well as in a few new phases. You have a very interesting subject to discuss, so I very much look forward to listening in and following the discussions. I wish you a very successful institute. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Atto. Atto, as mentioned, is the head of the research program at the council. I have a number of other colleagues online whom I would like to introduce, starting with the colleagues in the training, grants, and fellowships program, all of whom actually work with OANDA, and I would like to, at least from online, I can see somebody whom you worked with over the month, Emily Diouf. Emily has been working with you throughout this process, and she's been directly involved in organizing the institute. If there is anybody online who doesn't know Emily, then you really didn't apply to the institute. Thank you very much, Emily. I can see you there. Kumba Dauphin Diouf is also a program manager in training, grants, and fellowship, and has been with the program for a while. I noticed that he's scheduled to chair one of the sessions of the institute, so you definitely are going to have to engage him over that particular period. Thank you very much, Dauphin. I can also see Leonida Aza, where I don't know if I can see her on the screen at the moment. Leonid, can I spot you? My screen is a bit distorted this morning. Are you there? Okay, I can't see her, but Leonid is also a program manager within the program, focusing a lot more on issues to do with higher education. Many of our programs on higher education. I can see Dominique on the screen, also within the program, but I doubt that you have engaged her over the period. Dominique supports some of the higher education programs. And finally, if I'm not forgetting anyone else, finally we have Hadi Jo. Hadi is new in the council. She's a program manager joining the training and grants and fellowships program. I doubt that she's 3 months old in the council. So those are the colleagues I can see online from the program who are indeed very relevant and tied to what we do in training and grants. But I can also see many other colleagues online whom I would just like to mention, other than Atto in research. There is Bushra Sidi Hida, who is a program officer in the research program. And she's joining us, I believe, from Morocco. I am unable to see any other person joining us from the research program, but I can see other colleagues who are online who work with me in the secretariat. I can see Francine Adade, who works with me in my office. I can see Sheila, who also works with me. I can see Raki. I can see Olufemi Balogun, who joined us recently and will be in the research program. And I can see Fatima there. So those are the colleagues I can see online. Normally, we would be operating at full house if you are convening face-to-face, and I would have to introduce you to a range of colleagues. But given that we are in a virtual session, and the CODESRIA Secretariat isn't functioning fully given the COVID pandemic context, it is excusable that some of my colleagues are actually not there. But perhaps more important is to mention that I can see a member of the CODESRIA Executive Committee, Professor Brahim El Mushid, who I believe is joining us for the Institute from Morocco. Brahim, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. When I see more members of the executive committee joining us, I will surely be able to introduce them. And then perhaps two very important colleagues who will be relevant to the work that you are doing from the Secretariat. I would like to introduce Basiru Wan and Alion Fall. Please, if you can, we can see you. It's not good to be hearing about you and not. I can see Alion waving his hand, and Basiru is also there. Thank you very much, Alion and Basiru. Those are the colleagues who are helping us with our IT system. And all the questions, all the challenges, all the issues that you will have in relation to managing the Institute from our end in Dakar. Those two colleagues will definitely be on hand to help facilitate the Institute. Again, as I mentioned, this is the first time we are doing this, so we'll make a few mistakes, but we will learn in the process. So thank you very much, Basiru and Alion. And finally, in terms of the introductions, two members of Codesria who are not necessarily staff, the interpreters whose voices you can hear, but perhaps you haven't seen their faces. I don't know if Lamin and Salio are able to just show themselves for a minute so that the laureates and participants in the Institute can see you. The two colleagues whose images you can see. Yeah, Salio, I can now see you. I don't know if I can see Lamin. Those two colleagues are going to be interpreting for you for the Institute. They know enough about Codesria for them to be able to provide excellent service in interpretation. And they definitely are going to be joining you over the period of the Institute from start to end. And I must add that both Salio and Lamin have been associated with Codesria for a very, very long time. So in a sense, they are veterans of the council. And we are grateful that they are willing and happy to take time out of their schedules to join us for the Institute. Unfortunately, it is not possible in the amount of time we have to be able to ask all the laureates to introduce themselves. So I'm not even going to dare ask that every laureate introduce themselves. But I'm aware that the director of the Institute and the resource persons will structure the program in such a way that you are able to introduce yourself and get familiar with your colleagues as we go ahead. I would like to suggest, therefore, that each time you are given a chance to speak for the very first time, it will be necessary and perhaps very important for us for you to introduce yourself so that we understand, we know who you are and where you're coming from. The 2020-2021 Institute, Democratic Governance Institute, has attracted a total of 36 participants. Has attracted a total of 36 participants. Normally, when we have a face-to-face institute, we would select up to a maximum of 15 to 18 participants, gather you in a place often in Dakar, occasionally outside Dakar, and you would have a chance to interact with your colleagues over a period of 2 to 3 weeks in order to get the best out of what we can provide from CODESRIA. Last year, we were unable to convene the Institute for reasons that are obvious. We were caught up in the uncertainty generated by the emergence of the COVID pandemic. At the time when the pandemic began, it was this thing that we had no idea it was going to wreak the kind of havoc it has wreaked across the globe. And so there was enormous uncertainty during that period, all the way from January, but most importantly in March last year. By April, we had April into June, we had received applications for both the Gender Institute and Governance Institute. And we had shortlisted up to 15 applicants to join us for the Institute. We were forced to stall on actually convening the Institute for the reasons that I have mentioned. And so as we thought through the process and began to figure out the most suitable way to do this, we eventually decided early this year to go virtual with both the Gender Institute and the Governance Institute. At the end of the day, this decision involved a serious trade-off. That essentially forced us to sacrifice particular elements, pedagogical elements, but also other spin-off benefits that laureates of the Governance Institute enjoy when they are in a face-to-face meeting. Benefits that have to do with the face-to-face one-on-one engagement with laureates, benefits that have to do with the networking with colleagues in a face-to-face meeting who come from different nationalities, benefits that have to do with the sharpening your Pan-African consciousness by virtue of the fact that you develop a network during the Institute and carry on that network beyond the Institute. We've had to sacrifice all those benefits, partly because we need to continue our programming at the Council, partly because we have reporting obligations to attend to, but perhaps at the end of the day, partly because even though the uncertainty associated with the pandemic is clearer now than it was last year, perhaps people forget that the virus might be studying us a little more than we are studying it. And each time we feel that we have, can I ask Ceci Balogun to please mute your mic? Ceci Balogun, please mute your mic. Thank you very much. So I was saying that colleagues tend to forget that the virus seems to be studying us a little bit better than we are studying it. And so each time we find a solution to managing the virus, it finds a new way of beating that solution. And I think that this speaks directly, not necessarily to the biological stroke medical element of the virus, but really to the political stroke social element of the virus. Perhaps a different way of saying that at the end of the day, the Democratic Governance Institute is as relevant to the context within which we are working in, perhaps even more relevant compared, if you will, to if we assumed that the virus is merely a medical stroke biological problem that needs to be sorted out by colleagues in the biological sciences. And so at the end of the day, we have a total of 36 participants in this virtual institute, and I will speak to the strategy we are putting up in order to manage the institute better and the outputs that we hope to derive out of this. For the first time in the history of the Institute, Governance Institute, and perhaps for the first time in the history of any of the CODESRIA programs, we have more applications, well, more participants in the Institute from the Democratic Republic of Congo than we do from Nigeria. We have 7 participants from Nigeria. We have 8 participants from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and we have 6 participants from Cameroon. And most of the other countries represented, Tanzania, Congo, South Africa, Mali, Zimbabwe, Ghana, Kenya, and Cape Verde, and Morocco, either have 1, 2, or 3 participants in this particular institute. It's not surprising that we have more participants from Nigeria, DRC, and Cameroon. Indeed, if you took a study of the participation, application and participation into our programming, those 3 countries will definitely be among the top, and we appreciate the interest that colleagues in those countries do have in the programming that we have at CODESRIA. A brief word, therefore, about the institutes. Perhaps we take it for granted that given that every other institution is running one or the other of programs that mimic the CODESRIA institutes, we take it for granted that this has become, a normal thing for which the contribution of CODESRIA isn't important. But in fact, as Professor Bayo Lukoshi did mention, CODESRIA was a pioneer in terms of thinking of the idea of institutes as one intervention that was relevant to what we aimed to do, both in terms of growing a cohort of African academics, properly schooled, specialized, both at the level of theory, at the level of conceptualization, but also at the level of methodological training on specific thematic issues that the council felt were important. And in the early 1990s, when we started in CODESRIA, the first governance institute, this was really in response to a particular need. A need that, if you will, was emerging from the kind of discourses that were happening around the question of democratic transition on the continent. Colleagues will remember the serious debates that were happening around the turn from 1989 all the way into the early 90s, especially those relating to the emergence of a new thinking within the donor world, especially among both bilateral and multilateral donors, who had just woken up to the realization that Africa's development problem had something to do with this thing called governance. And a new discourse was developed, starting with the report published by the World Bank in 1989, titled Sub-Saharan Africa, From Crisis to Sustainable Growth. And they named this a long-term perspective study. That study essentially was designed to make a very specific argument that turned what we understood to be an important notion in the understanding of political processes in Africa, the notion of governance, into an instrument of conditionality imposed on African governments in particular, in order to extract particular outcomes in the process of interaction between African governments in the context of the long story around economic development. One of the key contributors to this debate, of course, is Professor Adebayo Odukoshi, who at the time, sitting in Uppsala in Sweden, led a program titled The Political Context of, I can't now remember the full title, but The Political Context of, Bayo, can you remind me the full title of the program that was running at the Nordic Africa Institute?
Yeah, the political and social context of structural adjustment in Africa.
Exactly.
Thank you.
And that program was useful in terms of the intervention it made. But at the end of the day, I think if laureates want something brief and pithy that they can look at to understand the politics of the notion of governance at the time, Thandika Mkandawire did publish a few years ago an interesting article titled Good Governance, the itinerary of an idea, in which he takes a very quick summary of the very difficult choices that different institutions, different African governments were making at the time. And the point I'm trying to make here is that the debates that did occur at the time, both within Africa and outside, in fact, did frame the rationale behind the Democratic Governance Institute that Codesria started at the time. Partly to rescue the notion of governance from being deployed as an instrument of aid conditionality, partly to rescue the notion of governance from being understood simply as a technocratic instrument designed to be measured in very specific ways, almost in some instances being understood as something that you do and finish. Governance as something you do and you finish. And in the context of the structural adjustment programs, in the context of donor pressure on African governments around this particular notion, you even had reports that measured performance, economic performance, governance performance. And to date, we still have numerous institutions, issuing governance reports annually or biannually, some of them with interesting data, some of them with hardly something that you want to sit with for too long. So many of you would have interacted with the Mo Ibrahim Foundation report, which eventually, at the end of the day, ends up with a prize to former African presidents. Some of you may have interacted with the VDEM report, I think, which is associated with the University of Gothenburg in Sweden. Some of you may have interacted indeed with the report on democracy issued by International IDEA, and a whole range of other reports that try to measure performance around democracy, and in the process, of course, with similar highlights on the notion of governance. But I think what Codesria was trying to do was to say something else. And I think Thandika summarizes this in a pretty interesting way, basically to say that while the World Bank, the IMF, and a range of donors who are focusing and trying to turn this into simply a technocratic instrument, their intervention was actually late in the day. That African academics across the board in the social sciences and humanities had in fact spent quite a substantial amount of time thinking about the notion of governance. And the manner in which African academics thought about the notion of governance was in the context of historic debates around the nature of relations between state and society. And that if you sample Codesria bulletin, if you sample many of the outputs of Codesria in the 1980s into the 1990s in particular, that this had remained an important element of constant reflection by a number of African social scientists, and that the negotiation around state-society relations, approaching it from within political science as a discipline, seeking to understand that from a multidisciplinary context, bringing in sociology, bringing in history, bringing in economics, provided perhaps a much richer, more relevant analysis of governance than perhaps the measures that the World Bank and other donors were trying to put on the continent. And for me, this is important. It is important because in the pioneering institute, Governance Institute, the emphasis had already shifted in CODESRIA from simply the focus on governance to an emphasis on democratic governance. And the reason why this institute is not simply a governance institute, but rather a democratic governance institute, was to place emphasis on a specific context that was defined not by a snapshot of what we do in measuring democracy, but rather by the process itself historical, but actually best understood historically from a very powerful sociological database. And that if you are going to think about governance, you cannot think about it. You cannot think about it as if it is something you do, finish, park on a shelf, and then go and focus on other things. That in fact, constantly, governance or democracy is constantly a work in progress. Constantly a work in progress. Which is why the emphasis of the Institute has always tended to be process. It's not a snapshot. And by insisting on that, CODESRIA was able in many ways to reframe the debate around governance, to rescue that debate from the restricting framework of conditionality, to challenge the assumptions that were imported into specific concepts that were used to analyze Africa and its challenges of development. Particularly when it came to an obsession with name calling. An obsession with name calling framed around notions of neo-patrimonialism. That for every challenge that Africa was facing at the time, and even today, it was not because the biography and nature of the current nation-state framework is problematic. It was because Africans are inherently unable to manage their affairs. And this is because of a system of patronage that has a way of protruding in each and everything that Africans are doing. Being able to rescue the discourse, especially within Africa, from this sickness of name calling, this sickness of turning everything into a technocratic, technical element, turning everything into a conditionality, I think has been the strongest contribution that CODESRIA has made, but also of colleagues who are aligned ideologically with the kind of argument that we have given on this. And so the Governance Institute was lucky to benefit from that thinking, but actually even luckier because at the time there was a coincidence and a convergence of concerns around how the notion of governance was being abused. And if I'm not wrong, the first funding of the Governance Institute was provided by Ford Foundation through conversations between some of our colleagues working at the Ford Foundation. At the time, Michael Chege, and one can think later on to colleagues like Adhiambo Adaga, Julius Ihonvere, who had a conviction about how to rethink some of these things from an African perspective. The intervention has turned out to be very, very important, not only in influencing the nature of debates, but also in influencing the history of the council. And it was perhaps not too clear until 1995 during the General Assembly that was held here in Dakar, that a powerful debate was conducted around notions of democratization processes in Africa, with the book edited by Shetu Shole and Jibrin Ibrahim, perhaps documenting some of the interesting leading essays that were being conducted there. In the 1995 Codesria General Assembly, what was interesting about that was that not only were we debating notions of governance and democracy, Codesria itself was going through an upheaval of sorts, with younger academics beginning to ask the question, why is Codesria a council without individual membership? Because at the time, Codesria was a council for which its membership was only restricted to institutes. Enforcing a charter amendment in 1995 that basically forced Codesria to begin to accept individual membership. But also, in the same in the same General Assembly, female colleagues coming up to ask the question, why isn't gender at the center of the work that Codesria does? Why haven't we admitted gender as an important category of analysis in the work that was being done in Codesria? And the youthful upheaval and the gender upheaval came together to redefine the history of Codesria since then. So not only was Codesria undertaking an intellectual agenda of reflection on democratization processes, it was also at the same time involved in its own reform reflection. Many who were there, I was not there, I speak as though I was there, but many who were there will tell you of the interesting spectacle when our colleague Jibrin Ibrahim was invited as a rapporteur to a panel for which some of the most senior colleagues in Codesria were making a presentation. Samir Amin, Achima Feje being some of the two colleagues who were presenting, and Jibrin Ibrahim taking on them with an article that, with a presentation that was eventually turned into an article and published in Codesria Bulletin. You should look for these things, they are available. Essentially challenging them on their assumptions around their left-leaning politics and how, this dismissal of liberal democracy was perhaps carrying their ideology a little too far. And with our colleague Tade Aina, who was then head of publications here at Codesria, provoking Jibrin to actually write up his own work. At the end of the day, what has turned out is that Codesria was onto something for starting the Governance Institute. Codesria was onto something for thinking about governance differently. And there are now many studies that align themselves to what was happening at Codesria. Many institutions have taken up the arguments that were advanced in Codesria, often without acknowledging, often without saying that the inspiration for the idea and the inspiration for the arguments they were making was actually an inspiration that was conceived in Dhaka, in the offices of the council, within the community of scholarship associated with CODESRIA. I am taking great pains to make these remarks. One, because one gets the sense, listening to laureates of the Institute over the last 4 years, that hardly do we understand the story behind this. One also gets the sense that we have lost the ideology that has informed the thinking that we, as inheritors of that great tradition, ought to be advancing. And many laureates tend to run away from even the word ideology. And Becky, I think there is a methodological challenge there, because a good many of our young academics are trained to think that knowledge must be fully neutral. Often they use the word objectivity without understanding that everywhere, methodologically, when data is disciplined, it carries a lot of the things that eventually that people have experienced. And the value of the Institute rests in the fact that we are bringing in African scholars to have a conversation amongst themselves, not to ignore the data that is coming, but actually to begin to appreciate it by disciplining the data to speak to the realities of the continent. And what we've done in CODESRIA over the years has really been that, to give you space to articulate your thoughts, informed by an understanding, if you will, of the context within which you come from. This is the work that was done as a result of the ferment around discussions on democratization processes. In the Gender Institute a few weeks ago, I made mention of the work of the late Ali Elikens, Algeria, The Challenge of Modernity, a book that is relevant to the study of Algeria today as it was a long time ago. A book designed to respond to particular problems emanating not just from Algeria, but from across the continent. Okay, studies that were done on social movements. CODESRIA has a massive study edited by, I think, Mahmoud Mamdani and Ernest Wamba Diawamba on social movements. Studies that were done on social policy. Studies that were done on a whole range of topics that are useful to this story. And at some point, I made mention of the fact that by turning the notion of governance into a technical thing, the lesson you miss is that as a process, democratization is susceptible to gains and losses, and that the vigilance you need to sustain the work of the process of democratization is as important as anything else. And I think this is where the importance of civic spaces will be located. And I leave this to both the director of the Institute, Becky, and Bio to explore it a little bit more in detail. Suffice it to note that when we were conceptualizing this particular study, and in conversation with the Ford Foundation, who are the ones primarily funding the Institute, with some additional funding from the Open Society, the Africa Regional Office, we were aware of the fact that the vigilance that is needed to keep civic spaces, spaces of civic engagement, a lot more open and a lot more vibrant, may have been lost in the last decade or so. Unfortunately, the loss cannot be thought of strictly as happening in Africa. And this is important because there are too many societies out there where democracy had been taken for granted, and where the backlash of democracy as a process with the reversals that I'm talking about have come to bear. Do I need to mention Donald Trump in the US? Do I need to mention what's been happening periodically, actually not periodically, almost in the last decade or so in Italy? The emergence of rather nativist, extremely conservative movements, a good many of which are informed by a seriously deranged racial discourse, parading race as an identity, as the thing, has had serious consequences on the development of democracy as an important part of how we negotiate our livelihoods. So you can imagine the surprise when it turns out that Donald Trump can get as many votes, if not more, than Hillary Clinton. And go back to the lessons of democracy that were packaged as part of the aid conditionality I spoke about in the 1980s, 1990s. Allowing a system that has particular sets of rules for democratization in Africa and a certain set of rules for democratization in other societies. But the challenge actually is even bigger, that while in the struggle for democratizing and for opening up civic spaces, we had assumed that societies in Europe and North America were natural allies. African civil society has had to wake up to the reality. It does not necessarily follow that they are our natural allies. And for me, the value of the Governance Institute, understood as Democratic Governance Institute, rests in the vigilance that we need academics in particular. Unfortunately, we tend to think about civil society and think of civil society as those non-state institutions that exist outside university campuses in Africa. And this is the reason why, partly the reason why the Governance Institute was conceived and pushed as an important idea. You cannot find as vibrant as a community of people who understood the importance of keeping spaces of civic engagement open better than university campuses in the 1980s, 1990s. Nigeria. The fortune of South Africa in the 1970s was changed towards the struggle against apartheid, largely by the intellectuals. University of Dar es Salaam, pioneering in the thinking that we need actually to codify an instrument that would be useful in the fight for intellectual freedom. And they were very clear not to think of it as academic freedom. They thought of it as intellectual freedom, signaling that what we do in the academy has everything to do with what other thinkers outside the academy can contribute. And therefore the struggle is not about making university lecturers secure their academic freedom, their intellectual freedom, but rather take this struggle into the university and beyond. And so the Kampala Declaration on Intellectual Freedom draws heavily on the struggles waged by colleagues in the University of Dar es Salaam. And I can mention a whole range of places, including the struggles here in Dhaka, led by colleagues in the University of Sheikh Anta Diop. I can mention struggles in Egypt. I can also mention more importantly, the struggles in Burkina Faso. The point I'm trying to make here is that the value of the Governance Institute also rests in what we do to keep the civic spaces open. And yes, civil society has a role to play, but conceptualizing civil society exclusively in terms of NGOs and related, you miss the point that historically trade unions have played a very significant role in this whole struggle. So I want to begin to conclude my remarks by making the following, what I consider some of these important points. Number one is that it is important for laureates of this institute to remember that, to remember the reason why the Democratic Governance Institute in Codesria is what it is, and to remind ourselves that as we conduct this edition of the Governance Institute, over the period within which the Governance Institute has been alive, we have over 500 laureates from the Codesria Governance Institute, a good many of whom are doing interesting things wherever they are. It's also important to constantly remind ourselves that as a process, democratic governance depends almost entirely on making sure that civic spaces do not shrink. And unfortunately, in the context of the pandemic, the civic spaces have shrunk quite a bit. And this is something we cannot run away from. The reported cases of violence against women and girls in the context of the pandemic have been higher. The reported cases against government agencies in terms of abusing people's rights have grown quite a bit. And medical stroke quarantine measures have been deployed, yes, to deal with the pandemic, but occasionally to simply shrink the civic space. And that opening up fronts of engagement with the rest of society is going to be important. And finally, we are not going to run away from the fact that with the developments of technology and the emergence of digital platforms around which the struggles for democracy and democratic governance have continued, that new space needs to be understood and conceptualized in a way that helps us expand our knowledge of democratic governance. And I feel like we are inadequately prepared to do this kind of thing. But also, while digital platforms have opened up spaces for us to engage beyond specific boundaries, of course, embedded in them are certain challenges that make it even more difficult to sustain this space. And that this institute can help us begin to think through some of these things. So I am aware I have spoken for a little too long, even though my colleagues gave me a lot of time. I want to try and sum up and conclude my own intervention at this point. I hope that the story behind the Governance Institute is clearer. I also hope that we have opened up some spaces for reflection. I think what remains for me to do is to make mention of the fact that this being the first virtual institute, we've had internal discussions in the Secretariat, and we feel that retaining this institute at the virtual level would undermine certain aspects of the work we do. And so we've agreed that out of the 36 participants in this institute, the director of the institute and the resource persons working with colleagues from the training grants and fellowships program at Codesria will select approximately 10 extremely interesting extremely powerful contributions to the Institute. I am leaving the parameters of choice to the director and his team, but I feel like it is important for us to be able to publish the work coming out of this institute within record time. I have seen a number of colleagues online who have participated in previous CODESRIA institutes. And we haven't published the results of the outputs from their institute. The reason we haven't published is that, number one, they delayed in sending us their reports. Number two, a few of them sent us reports that could not pass the peer review test. And number three, that we had internal challenges in terms of accessing solid peer review processes. So instead of undergoing that challenge, we think that if we can find roughly 10 good papers and 10 good contributions out of the process of the Institute, in a context where social distancing, vaccination perhaps would have been taken care of, we need to convene those 10 contributors into a face-to-face meeting. And we would like to convene those 10 this year. The 10 papers or so that we pick should be advanced, should be worth taking beyond the Institute, and will go to a final face-to-face meeting, at which what we will do is to finalize those papers and prepare them for publication. The director of the Institute has actually spent roughly 3 to 4 months before this Institute writing his own paper. So you can actually read the paper that he has written. And I believe Owanda will share this paper immediately it's typeset. So the director's contribution is already there. What we need are the laureates of the Institute to give us their outputs within a certain defined time frame. And more than 2 months will be too much, because we are able to publish your work immediately. So I need all the laureates of the Institute to know that we are going to convene a face-to-face meeting at a place where we can guarantee social distancing and all that, and make sure that your paper is immediately put into a production process leading to a book publication. This is the challenge I want to leave all of you with. I would like to stop at this point and thank all of you for listening to me patiently, and thank you for allowing CODESRIA to intervene in your intellectual life in the manner in which we are going to. And hopefully you are going to have an interesting institute that facilitates your professional growth wherever you are, and that offers you something slightly better than perhaps what you experience every day in your own universities. Thank you very much, and I believe that I will hand over to Ibrahim Owanda or to the director, however you have organized, to direct us on how we proceed. I noticed that I was supposed to run this session up to 10:45, but I think that was a little too much time and we don't need any more. So Becky, hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Godwin. I think part of the idea was for us to get to know the laureates. And so maybe with the remaining time until 10:45, we could get to know, maybe not everyone. We can find a way. There's an echo somewhere. I'm trying to figure out where it's coming from.
If we can have Olusegun Olade, I can't read the second name properly. It's not too clear on my screen. But Olusegun, your mic is on.
Okay, thank you. So my suggestion, Gordon and Ibrahim, is maybe we can take the first 18 laureates. There's still another mic that is open. Okay, let's see. Okay, so let's see if we can do that. That's my suggestion, Ibrahim, that we probably just get the first 18 laureates to introduce themselves, tell us a bit about, maybe take a minute each so that we don't really take much time. And then the rest can use the chat function to just introduce themselves. And then when we start the second session after lunch, we could start with the other 18 just to finalize knowing who is in the room. I don't know if there's any alphabetical order, but my suggestion would be to do that.
Oanda?
That's okay. Maybe, Benki, can we call out their names? Because if we leave it to their devices to decide who speaks first, then we may end up with some kind of chaos. Let me look at the program and then call them out.
Oanda, I can help you. I'm holding the program here.
Okay.
Can I have Olusegun Olade to introduce himself?
Yeah, thank you, Director. Are you hearing me, sir?
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Olusegun Olade.
Yeah, but we don't see you. It would be better if you put your picture on the screen. That would be wonderful.
Oh, okay. I wouldn't know how to put on the video.
I think feel free to introduce yourself, and at some point we will be able to, because the amount of time it will take to do all this technical work is a bit complicated.
Okay, sir, thank you. My name is Olusegun Olade. I'm a lecturer at Best University here at Nigeria. I want to appreciate the Institute for giving me this opportunity once again. This is the third laureate opportunity being given. So I appreciate the Institute, and I hope to contribute meaningfully and actively towards the success of the Institute. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Michelle Asuma. Michelle Asuma. I hope I'm reading the name properly. From the DRC. Celestine Tukala. Celestine.
Hello.
Please introduce yourself.
Bonjour.
Introduce yourself.
Oui, bonjour. J'ai connu un petit problème dans mon ordinateur et j'utilise l'ordinateur de mon collègue ici. Je ne sais pas si vous me suivez.
Yes, we can hear you.
Oui, c'est bien Michel Bakaya Souma de la RDC, Kisangani. Je suis de l'Université de Kisangani. Je suis très heureux de participer dans cet institut pour apprendre et bénéficier de l'expérience des uns et des autres sur la gouvernance de la société civile. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Tukala. Hughes Chana from Cameroon. Hughes Chana from Cameroon. Masawe from Tanzania. Masawe from Tanzania. Lamana.
Good morning, everyone. Je suis Antoinette Lamana du Cameroun et je suis heureuse de prendre part à cet institut. Merci.
Stanislas Godi.
Greeting everyone. My name is Abosede Omowumi Babatunde from the Center for Peace and Strategic Studies, University of Ilorin, Nigeria. And I'm here in the Condestral Democratic Institute because the theme for this year aligns with my research interests on conflict sensitivity and gender sensitivity in civil society, peace building activities. Focus on the region of Nigeria. Thank you very much. I wish everyone a fruitful and productive institute.
Thank you very much. Did I get a Stanislas Godi? Chikuma Okoli? Chikuma Okoli? Justin Mulamba from DRC?
Oui, bonjour. Allô? Allô?
Yes, we can hear you.
Allô? Oui, bonjour à tout le monde. Je suis Justin Béa de la République démocratique du Congo, de l'Université de Kinshasa. Et je suis très ravi de participer à cet institut. Je remercie le Codestria pour le choix porté à ma personne et je souhaite à tout le monde un bon institut. Merci.
Thank you very much, Moish Noah Ekene from Cameroon. Ekene from Cameroon. Jean-Pierre Kapanga, DRC. Jean-Pierre Kapanga from DRC. Landa Nala from South Africa. Gabriel Boyenga.
Oui, bonjour. Vous m'entendez?
Oui.
Ah oui, bonjour. Moi, c'est Gabriel Bantamba Bonyenga de la République démocratique du Congo. Je suis assistant à l'université de Kisangani. Je suis très heureux de participer pour la toute première fois à l'Institut du Codestria. Et en tout cas, c'est une joie pour moi d'être sélectionné parmi les lauréats de cette année. Et j'ai confirmé ma participation et mon assiduité sur la suite de l'Institut. Voilà, bonne participation aussi à tous les participants. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. Olawale Akurinde. Olawale. Mohamed Diakite. Mohamed Diakite, I saw you there somewhere. We are not getting your mic is off. Your mic is off. Okay.
Bonjour. Je suis Mohamed Lamine Diakité du Mali. Et je suis au Centre d'études pour le développement en Afrique jeune et spécial. Et je suis en tout cas très heureux de participer à l'Institut de Codicéria. Et je pense bien qu'à la sortie de cet institut, ça sera en tout cas un moyen pour moi de participer activement au développement et aussi à la démocratie de mon pays. Je vous remercie.
Sunday Olay. Sunday Olay. Stanislas Bagirimana. Arthur Dominic de Graaf from Ghana. Martin Milolo Nsanda.
Oui, alors merci beaucoup Godwin. Bonjour à tous. C'est un plaisir pour moi de vous revoir encore. Je suis Martin Milolo de l'Université de Kinshasa au Centre d'études politiques CEP. Nous avons été à l'Institut dernier à Abidjan. Je connais certains membres de l'équipe du secrétariat de Codicéria. C'est toujours un plaisir de vous rencontrer. Je revoyais encore ma photo où Godwin me remettait mon certificat de participation à Abidjan. Donc, c'est comme si notre institut était le dernier avant la pandémie. Donc, c'était un plaisir. Merci beaucoup et passons un bon temps. Merci.
Milolo, I'm not.
This is greetings from Ghana. Greetings from Ghana. And this is Dominic de Graaf. Dominic specializes in political science. And yeah, this is Arthur Dominic from Kwame Nkrumah University of Ghana. And Arthur Dominic's specialized area is in political science. And he's a lecturer in the Department of History and Political Studies. I'm happy to be part of this institute, and I'm expecting a lot of colleagues who are the Laurents and then also the resource person here, Mark, to do the program. Thank you very much, all of you.
Lilian Anyango, I can see you have raised up your hand. Is there something? You can also take advantage to introduce yourself. Lilian Anyango Olik.
Yes. Sorry, I was actually requesting to introduce myself because I'm using my phone and it was about to go off. So
okay, introduce yourself.
Yes, my name is Lilian Anyango Olik. Yes, thank you for this opportunity. My initial college is University of Nairobi. Glad to be here.
Thank you very much. I can also see There is somebody else whose hand is raised up. No, that was Arthur Dominic. I think you can drop it now. Okay. Eric Lomatang from Cameroon. Eric Lomatang from Cameroon.
Oui, allô, bonjour. Moi, c'est Eric Abana-Digbadi. Je suis plutôt de la République démocratique du Congo. Je suis chercheur à l'université de Kisangani. Je suis vraiment content pour participer à cet institut de la gouvernance des CODESRIA pour échanger avec d'autres chercheurs et puis bénéficier aussi de l'encadrement des personnes ressources pour le développement de l'Afrique en gouvernance. Je profite pour remercier les CODESRIA pour avoir retenu ma thématique sur la machine à voter que nous aurons à confiner avec d'autres collègues et les personnes ressources. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. That was Eric Abanatia. There is Eric Lomatang from Cameroon. Robin, I saw your hand up. I have no idea why, so you can take advantage to introduce yourself. Robin Bea Keshi.
D'accord, merci. Ok, merci, bonjour à tout le monde. Je suis Robin Beakesh de la République démocratique du Congo. Je suis très content de prendre part à cet institut sur la démocratie. Ensemble, avec les informations que je vais obtenir auprès du directeur, personnes et ressources, ça va m'aider à améliorer mon papier pour la suite de mes recherches dans le domaine des droits et aussi autres domaines. Merci, c'est un plaisir et bon institut à tout le monde.
Thank you. Mbaga from Cameroon. John Mbaga from Cameroon. Ceci Balogun, introduce yourself. Ceci Balogun.
Good morning. My name is
Ceci, unfortunately, we can't hear you properly. Ceci.
Hello,
Ceci.
can you hear me?
Yeah, that's better. Sorry, Ceci, we can't hear you. Odia Barros Varela from Cape Verde.
Hello.
Yes, please.
Much, Dr. Mumba. My name is Odair Barros Varela. I'm from Cape Verde, Cabo Verde. As you know, Cabo Verde is a Portuguese official language, but I'm here to speak in English. I'm from the University of Cape Verde. I was the former president of the School of Governance and Business. I'm very happy to be here. I look forward to the discussion on the need to protect and recognize and value the diversity of democratic forms of governance in the context of COVID-19 pandemic. And I wish you all a great journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Harrison Adewa Leido.
Yes. Good morning. Good morning. You hear me, please?
We can hear you.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. My name is Harrison Dewale Do, as rightly introduced. Okay. I'm a PhD student at the Obafemi Awolowo University here in Nigeria. Also an assistant lecturer at the Ondo State University. I want to take this opportunity to thank Codestra for yet another opportunity to the Institute this year. I hope that I'm able to contribute immensely to the success of this year's Institute. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you. Zukizwa Loba. Zukizwa Loba. Zuki. Sindiso.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to say thank you to Codestria for this opportunity. My name is Cindy Joe. I'm at the University of Fort Hare in South Africa. I do research in language contact, multilingualism, translanguaging, interconnections of gender and communication in society. I feel privileged to be part of this institute, and I look forward to an engaging and insightful experience. I thank you so much to Codestria for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I saw Sunday Olale online. Are you still online? I think I have gone through my list. Those who are not online will find an opportunity for introduction later on. I feel that we've spent most of the time productively. And by Dakar time, it's roughly 10:30. So I think I should hand over back to the director to proceed with the program. Others who have not introduced themselves will follow up later on.
Thank you very much, Godwin. I see Arthur's hand is still up. Do you want to bring it down or ask? Okay, great. So thank you very much. I think we have just a few minutes before we take a break. Maybe we can talk a bit, Ibrahim, about the agenda, the program, so that when we come back, we can just go straight into the business of the day. Colleagues, you will notice that the way we have structured the program is based on the papers that you submitted. So we went through your proposals and clustered. Okay, I see. I think Celestine's hand is up. Do you want to say what you want to say? And Arthur. Celestine Chimande. You're on mute. You're on mute. You are still on mute, Celestine. If you can unmute yourself.
Oh, excusez-moi, c'est une inadvertance. Je n'ai rien à dire. Je n'ai rien à dire. Excusez-moi.
Okay, so if you can you lower your hand so it doesn't confuse us later? It's still up. Okay, thanks. I was saying, colleagues, just before we go to break, you will note that the way the program is designed and arranged is based essentially on the proposals that you submitted, and later on during the course of the institute, we will have presentations by each and one of you. But we looked at all the proposals and clustered them into different thematic areas. And what we would want to do is to start each day by focusing on a particular theme under which we have grouped a lot of your papers. Go through that theme so that when we get to the time when you present your papers, there's at least some ideological grounding, the conceptual issues have been taken care of, and so will be some of the issues that have to do with methodology and otherwise. And so you will see that today and tomorrow, we're focusing mainly on framing the two concepts, the civil society concept and the governance concept. And I think it was good that Professor Olukoshi mentioned that he was the pioneer director for the Institute, because we're actually having him speak to us later in the afternoon. He's one of the leading experts in this area, more importantly in the governance space. I've not known anyone other than Professor Olukoshi who can speak to you eloquently about the theory and also what is happening in terms of practice. I mean, he's somebody that is grounded in both theory and practice. And so I think that's one of the beauties of this institute, that you are not only going to, anchor everything on theory, but we are also going to bring some of the practical experiences that some of us bring to the table. And so the various themes that you would see is that, one of them, which Gordon already spoke to, will be the very notion of the civic space. What do we mean by civil society? How has it evolved over time, and how does it apply in the African context? So we'll deal with that, but we'll also look at civil society and the digital space. Some of your papers are focusing on that, and that's one of the issues that we cannot ignore in this point in time. And I took part in listening in to some of the lectures at the Gender Institute, and the issue of surveillance and cyberspace was key. And I think that it would be, would have lost an opportunity for us if we don't address the issue of civil society and the digital space. The many opportunities that the cyberspace has brought and technology has brought, but also the many challenges and the many difficulties that civil society organizations and formations find themselves in. The COVID-19 pandemic was just such a force that most civil society organizations were not prepared to deal with. And the introduction of virtual platforms and other forms of working, especially adopting the tools of the future of work, were not areas that most civil society formations were comfortable with. So we would want to pay particular attention to that particular thematic area. There's also a thematic area around civil society and gender. And of course, without repeating what Gordon said, if you read the history of the Gender Institute, you begin to see how gender studies and gender thinking was brought into the mainstream thinking. And the first institutions to actually, even do that was Codestria itself. And so there's so many writings there that I think you could look into that would explain the concept of gender and civil society. And so we have a specific thematic area that would focus on that. There's also a thematic area around civil society and organizational development. And, I think this is obviously speaking to institutional formats of civil society, but there are other forms that we have to talk about: social movements, faith-based institutions, research institutions, among others. All these have an element of organizational development that we want to look at. And here, most importantly, will be issues of resource mobilization, will be issues of leadership, management, but the very concept of governing. How do you govern civil society, especially in the context of uncertainties, in the context of crisis, but also in the context of governments that are introducing restrictive measures on civil society. And that links very well to another theme, which is the theme on civil society and electoral processes. Part of the democratic governance and some of the tools that we always refer to in building democracy, it's not just constitutions that we have in our countries, but it's also the participation in various processes, key of which is elections. Those that we elect to govern us are the ones that in many ways determine the environment under which civil society operates. And so that theme on electoral processes and the participation of civil society finds lots of meaning in your papers, but there's a lot that has been written around that. And then I think the other thematic area that we have covered is the civil society and socio-economic development. Again, what is the contribution of civil society to the various economies in Africa? There are several writings that have been done to try and ascertain whether or not civil society contributes to the socio-economic development in the continent. It was fascinating that Godwin mentioned Tade Aina, who for many years worked at Codestria, but went on to work for several other civil society formations in the form of foundations. He's recently joined MasterCard Foundation, and one of his areas that he's interested in going forward, at least for the next 4 to 5 years, is understanding the contribution of civil society to African economies. And so this is something that we'll be paying particular attention to. And so some of the papers that we have already started working on might provide some of the theoretical groundings as well as some of the methodological approaches that we would need to probably borrow when we are developing this project with Tade from the MasterCard Foundation. So I think those are the thematic areas that we have arranged ourselves and the entire program between today and the end of the Institute. And so we will be doing that firstly by framing, and that's what the role of the resource persons is to do, is to frame the issues. But we spend a lot of time really giving you the opportunity to discuss among yourselves, with yourselves, but with the guidance of the resource persons. So we have come to the end of this particular session. I think we are taking a break until, let me see, I'm in a different time zone. So I think we are taking a break until 11, and then we come back at 11 to have a session where we will look at the concept of civil society, how it has evolved, so that we can situate the shrinking and shifting spaces within that framing. And then thereafter, we will have some discussions, we'll break for lunch, come back, and then we'll have Professor Olukoshi speak to us about governance and the role of civil society. We'll then have our discussions and end our day with those discussions. So with that, I hand over to Ibrahim in case there are any announcements, but I will see you at 11 o'clock, Dakar time.
Thanks, Benke. No particular announcements. I think we needed to remind the laureates again that the logic behind the organization of the program, where their presentations come up the end, is our expectations that they will continue reflecting on their papers, enrich them where they should, change a perspective where they think they have been convinced by the lectures from the resource persons and the discussions from colleagues that they needed to change in order to work the papers towards some level of perfection and, look at the 10 slots that the secretary mentioned about. So it has to be a process of continuous reflection. And ideally, we sent out a message to the laureates, telling them certain expectations. What was evident when the secretary was calling is that some colleagues will come sign in and then disappear, which means they will be missing some discussions that are going on during the sessions. And we will really appreciate if they give commitment, full-time commitment to whatever discussions are going on without just signing in and switching off. Thanks. Enjoy your 15 minutes break, then we convene at 11.
Thank you.
Yeah.